The last night I spent in that house, my husband sat across the kitchen table from me and said 4 words. Calm, certain. Like he was reading from a page he had already memorized. You owe me this. I had been awake since before the roosters. I had packed what I was allowed to pack, which was not much. I had folded my 2 good dresses, wrapped my mother's Bible in a piece of muslin, and set my bag by the back door before he was up. I had planned every detail of that morning for 4 months, and then he sat down across from me at that table, in the lamplight, with his hands flat on the wood and those 4 words, and everything I had planned went very quiet inside me. Because I knew exactly what he meant, and I knew that if I gave it to him, I was giving something away I could never get back, and I knew that if I didn't, I might never leave at all. Stay with me. What I am about to tell you about what Amish husbands are permitted to demand before a wife can go is going to make you understand something about control that has nothing to do with locked doors. My name is Martha. I grew up Old Order Amish in Elkhart County, Indiana. I left 6 years ago, and this channel, Hannah the Amish Girl, is where I finally say the things my community would never allow me to say out loud. If you want to hear more hidden truths like this one, please subscribe and tap the like button. And drop your city or country in the comments below. I read every single one. Now let me explain what you are walking into, because this story has a shape most people from the outside do not recognize. In Amish communities, marriage is not a contract between 2 people. It is a covenant before God and before the church, and the church has opinions about what that means when one person wants to leave. The Ordnung, the body of unwritten rules that governs every aspect of Amish life, does not use the word divorce. It does not use the word separation. What it uses is the word meidung, shunning. And the mechanics of how a woman exits an Amish marriage are not legal mechanics. They are social mechanics. They are spiritual mechanics. They are about what the community will permit her to keep and what it will take. Her children can be kept from her. Her family's tables can be closed to her. Her name can stop being spoken in the homes she grew up in. And her husband, if he chooses, can make her wait, not by filing paperwork, not through any court, by simply refusing to release her before the bishop, by withholding what amounts to community permission for her to exist outside the marriage without being treated as spiritually dead. And there is one more thing he can demand before he gives that release. One thing the community permits him to ask for, quietly, with no written rule, and no one to say he is wrong. I will tell you what it is. But first I have to tell you about the marriage itself, because you cannot understand the demand without understanding what it was built on. I was 20 when I married Amos. He was 26, which in my community was considered settled. He had his own farm, 34 acres outside of Goshen, a good woodlot, and a reputation for being serious and devout. The church approved. My father approved. My mother patted my hand the morning of the wedding and said, "He is a steady man." She meant it as comfort. I understand now that steady and safe are not the same word. The early years were not violent. I want to say that plainly because when women tell stories like this one, people expect bruises. What Amos had was not a temper. It was a system, small, patient, invisible from the outside. He decided when we had visitors. He decided which of my friendships were appropriate, and which were, as he put it, drawing me toward prideful thinking. He decided when I had worked hard enough and when I had not worked hard enough. He never raised his voice. He never had to. In the Amish world, a husband's authority is theological. It does not require enforcement. It is simply the order of things, and the order of things does not need to announce itself. It just exists, like weather, like winter, like the ground beneath your feet that you stopped noticing because it has always been there. What woke me up was a quilt. That sounds small. It was not small. My grandmother had taught me to quilt before her hands gave out, and I was good at it. Not just competent. Good. The kind of good that other women noticed at the work frolics, that made the older women stop and hold a corner of my stitching up to the light. Amos knew this. And one November, when a woman from 2 settlements over offered to include 3 of my quilts in a sale that would bring in more money than Amos made in a month of contract carpentry, he said no. Not because we did not need the money. We needed the money. He said no because the sale was being organized by a woman whose husband had left the faith, and being associated with her household was not something he was willing to permit. I stood at the sink that evening and I thought, for the first time with full clarity, he does not manage this farm. He manages me, and there is no end to it. Because a man who manages you does not stop when the reason is gone. He finds the next reason. And the next. Reasons are not the point. Control is the point. I spent 2 more years gathering something I can only call internal evidence. Not evidence for a court, evidence for myself. The quiet accumulations of a life being steadily narrowed. My sister Ruth, who stopped coming by after Amos twice made clear she was unwelcome. The letter from my childhood friend Miriam in Ohio that I found opened and refolded on his desk. The Sunday morning he told me that my prayer covering was tied too loosely, and that a woman who could not keep her head covered properly was a woman whose inner life was out of order. I said nothing. I pressed my covering tight, and I kept the evidence inside me like kindling, dry and waiting. There was one afternoon I have never spoken about until now. It was a Wednesday in late March, the kind of cold that comes back after you think winter is finished. Rebecca was asleep upstairs. Jonas was in the barn with Amos. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pencil, and I was writing a list. Not a grocery list, not a list of chores. A list of things that were mine before I was his wife. Things I had liked, things I had wanted. Things I had been before the wedding made me something else. I got to 7 items, and then I heard his boots on the porch, and I folded that paper into the smallest square it would go, and I pushed it into the pocket of my apron, and I stood up and I went to the stove. He came in and I handed him a cup of coffee and he sat down and he never knew. I kept that list folded in the lining of my winter coat for 3 years. I do not know why I am telling you this now except that the list mattered. Not the items on it. The act of writing it. Because it meant that somewhere inside me, under everything the marriage had become, there was still a Martha who knew she had existed before Amos, and that meant she could exist after him too. When I finally went to the bishop, I went alone. This was already unusual enough to cause talk. Women did not go to the bishop without their husbands except in cases of serious harm, and what I had did not look like serious harm from the outside. The bishop was a quiet man, older, with a white beard he had grown since before I was born. He listened. He folded his hands. And then he said something I have thought about every day since. He said that what I was describing sounded like a wife who had not yet fully submitted to the spiritual leadership of her husband, and that perhaps what was needed was more prayer and more patience and more willingness on my part to see Amos's guidance as coming through him from God. I walked home in the November cold and I understood something clearly for the first time. The system was not going to open from the inside. I was going to have to find the edge of it and go through. There is a part of this story I cannot tell you here. Not on this platform. Not under these rules. The algorithm has limits, and I have learned exactly where they are. So I wrote the rest down instead, slowly, without the softening, without the cuts. Everything the camera is not permitted to show. The book is called The Ordnung They Never Wrote Down. 208 pages of what plain life looks like from the inside of it. The link is in the first comment of this video. That is where the part I could not say out loud lives. What I can tell you is this. When I told Amos I was leaving, the conversation lasted 4 hours. Not because he begged. Amos did not beg. He reasoned. He was patient and systematic and thorough in a way that reminded me of watching him work out a carpentry problem, all measurement, no wasted motion. He reminded me that I would lose standing before the church. I said I understood. He reminded me that my parents would be required to shun me if they remained in good standing themselves. I said I understood. He reminded me of our children. We had two, Jonas, who was 8, and little Rebecca, who had just turned 5. He said their names carefully, slowly, like he was placing stones. And I felt each one land exactly where he meant it to. I said that I intended to take the children with me, and that I had already spoken to a woman in Goshen, English, a legal advocate who helped women in my situation. His expression did not change when I said this. That was the moment I understood he had already thought further ahead than I had. In the weeks that followed, I learned what Amos was permitted by the community to do. He was permitted to appear before the bishop and formally contest the dissolution of the marriage on spiritual grounds, which would trigger a process of church council that could last months, and during which I would be expected to remain in the home and continue my duties while the elders discerned God's will. He did this. He was permitted to approach my father and ask him to intercede, to call me back to submission as a matter of family faithfulness. My father came to me with tears on his face, and I held his hands and I said, "Dad, I love you, and I am still going." He was permitted to deny cooperation with any civil process, and because Indiana law at that time had limited mechanisms for compelling cooperation in cases that did not involve documented physical harm, his refusal cost me months of legal delay. He did this too. But there was one more thing. The thing I did not know was coming until the night before I finally left. The community has no formal name for it, no line in the Ordnung that says a husband may demand this. But every woman who has left an Amish marriage and been honest about it knows what it is. Before a man will go before the bishop and give what amounts to his community release of a wife, before he will stop contesting, before he will let the process move forward without his active obstruction, he may ask for one final act of submission. Not signed, not witnessed. Private, between husband and wife, framed as a last honoring of the covenant even as it ends. A night, one final night in which the wife, before she goes, returns to him as a wife. He frames it as closure, as right order, as the least she can do. Some women I have spoken to since, quietly, in the careful way we speak to each other, have called it the toll. You pay the toll, and then the gate opens, and you walk out. You do not pay it, and the gate stays closed, and the delays multiply, and the lawyer bills grow, and your children watch their parents in a cold war that has no end date. Amos asked for it the morning before I left, sitting across from me at that kitchen table, hands flat on the wood, lamplight between us. "You owe me this." 4 words. Calm, certain. I want to tell you what I did. But first I need you to understand something about the women who have paid that toll, because there are more of them than anyone in those communities will admit. They are not weak, they are not failures. They are women who were standing at a gate that would not open by any other means, with their children on the other side of it, with their families closing behind them, with a system that had been designed for centuries to make their exit as costly as possible. The women who paid that toll paid it because sometimes the cost of the only exit is something you never agreed to give. And the community that permitted that demand, that provided no mechanism to challenge it, that called it the natural authority of a husband over his wife in the final hours of a covenant, that community owns what was taken. The silence owns it. Every bishop who looked away owns it. I picked up my bag from beside the back door. I looked at Amos across that table, and I said, "No." Just that. One word, flat and final and terrifying in my own mouth. I said no, and I walked to the door, and I picked up my bag, and I did not look back at him because I knew if I saw his face I might lose the word I had just found. I walked out into the cold morning, and I kept walking, and I did not stop. The legal process took 3 more months. It was brutal in the way that only a slow, grinding institutional resistance can be brutal. I lost things I am still grieving. I will not pretend otherwise. But I did not pay that toll. And there is not a day since that I have not known, in the deepest part of myself, that the no I said at that table was the first fully free word I had ever spoken in my life. My friend Edna left her husband the year before I left Amos. She and I did not know each other inside the community. We found each other after, the way women like us find each other, through the informal network of those who have crossed the same border. Edna paid the toll. She has told me so, plainly, without flinching. She paid it because her daughter was 6 years old, and the delays were destroying them both, and she calculated what she was willing to spend to get her child out. She does not call herself a victim. She calls herself a woman who made a decision under conditions that should never have existed. I do not call her anything except brave, and I mean that without softening. The toll was demanded. She answered. Her daughter grew up free. Every woman who faces that gate has to decide what she can give and what she cannot give, and no one who has not stood at that gate has any standing to judge the answer. I found my therapist 2 years after I left. She was the third English person I had ever spoken to about my marriage in any depth. The first was the legal advocate in Goshen. The second was a woman at a shelter outside of Fort Wayne who had a quiet office and a box of tissues on the table, and who asked me, on our second meeting, whether I understood that what had been demanded of me had a name in the outside world, and that the name was not submission, and was not covenant, and was not the will of God. I had sat in that chair, and I had not cried. I was past crying by then. I had simply nodded and felt something very old and very heavy shift inside me, the way ice shifts in a river in late February, not breaking yet but beginning to move. My therapist, when I finally reached her, said something I have written down and kept. She said, "A system that requires a woman to pay with her body for the right to leave has already told you everything you need to know about what it thought she was worth." I have read that sentence on hard days ever since. What I did not expect after I left was how long I would carry the weight of the things I had not done wrong. That is the particular cruelty of a system, like the one I grew up inside. It does not only punish the exit, it teaches you to punish yourself for wanting one. For years after I walked out that door, I woke up some mornings and felt guilty. Not for leaving, for not leaving sooner. For the years I gave to a marriage that was slowly erasing me, telling myself that endurance was faithfulness and that silence was virtue. My therapist had a word for that too. She called it internalized shame, and she said it was not mine to carry. She said the people who built the system put it there, and I was allowed to set it down. Setting it down took longer than leaving did, but I did both. The Amish world gave me things I carry still, a knowledge of work that is bone deep, the memory of community so complete it had a texture, a smell, a sound, the particular sound of 100 people singing from the Ausbund in a room with no instruments, just voices, just breath, just faith. I do not hate the world I came from, but there is no covenant that requires a woman to surrender herself as the price of her own exit. There is no God I believe in now who designed that gate or set that toll. There is no theology I will accept that calls a woman's coerced submission in the last hours of a marriage a holy thing. What Amos demanded was not a spiritual right. It was the last move in a very long game. And the women who have paid it, and the women who have refused it, we are all standing on the same side of that fence now, looking back at the gate, knowing what it cost to get through. If this story found you because you are standing at a gate of your own, I see you. If you have already paid a toll you never agreed to, and you carry that in silence, I see you. Your exit was not a failure. Your cost was not your fault. The system that demanded it is what failed. And if no one in your life has said those words to you clearly, I am saying them now. If you want to read the version of this story that YouTube will not allow, the full pages are in The Ordnung They Never Wrote Down. First comment of this video, and that is everything. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.